Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No Darkness But Ours. Whoa.
And today we are here to discuss a new movie that premiered at Fright Fest in the UK earlier this year, and we'd like to say a big thank you to Keir Waller at Strike Media for letting us have a screener of the film so we get to talk about it. And the film is Broken Bird, directed by Joanne Mitchell, and starring Rebecca Calder, James Fleet, Sacharissa Claxton. It's a really, it's a psychological horror movie. Filmed mostly on location in Serbia, interestingly.
Interesting.
Although, yeah, kind of doubling for sort of, I suppose, northern England. And yeah, I was hugely impressed by it. Mitchell is married to Dominic Brunt, who co-wrote the screenplay. He wrote the screenplay rather, based on an original idea from her and Tracy Shields. And they're both. Funny enough, I actually saw Shields in a short film called Radio Silence some years ago, which was a kind of set during this kind of a Zompok film, but kind of a very interesting and novel twist in it. And it's a very strong performance. So she's a very interesting actress. And anyway, Brunt made his first feature back in, I think it might have been as long back in 2013, a film called Before Dawn, in which he and Mitchell co-starred. That's a really good movie. I think it's still on Prime. And it's worth seeing. Brunt recently made another movie, Wolf Manor, which is a very different, but a Blacklead comic film, by the way.
Yeah, that's on TV right now over here.
Yeah, well worth the watch. This is Mitchell's first film as a director, and
well, it's gorgeous. Just really beautifully put together.
It's astonishingly, it's beautifully done. It's just made with a complete sort of assurance and detail, both in terms of how it looks, in terms of the performances, which are just absolutely spot on.
Very Gothic, but very Hitchcockian at the same time.
Very well so.
Like a beautiful kind of a beautiful sense of chiaroscuro, like a really deep kind of darkness to it.
Yeah, the basic premise of it is, we'll try and keep this spoiler free, because we both really like the film. We very much liked people to discover this all for themselves. Is we have a woman in her 30s or 40s, I think.
Yeah, I'd say late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, Sybil Chamberlain, who's played by Rebecca Calder, who is just incredible, and she's this quiet woman on her own. She writes poetry. She has taxidermy as a hobby, which is finding dead animals and stuffing them, which is possibly the first kind of clue that this is. I don't like to judge people for their hobbies, but you're kind of like, okay, this is a bit strange. But she does some poetry, and she gets and I think when she's doing one of the scenes where she's reading some of her poetry, you get the first this sense very early on that what she perceives as happening and what is actually happening are two quite different things.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of cross between, like, say, Amelie and Norman Bates.
I did actually think of. I did sort of. Rebecca Calder did, from certain angles, actually remind me a bit of Audrey Tautou. If Audrey Tautou was like a bit scarier.
Yeah, if she could cut glass with her cheekbones.
Yeah, truly amazing. She has truly amazing bone structure. Gives her a very striking look. But her performance is just incredible. She gets a job at a funeral home, which is by James Fleet, who's probably most familiar as playing sort of slightly dim or absent-minded, or affable, but not necessarily very capable sort of upper class characters. He was in Four Weddings and a Funeral,
right.
among many other roles. And in this, he's barely recognisable. He's this with a big bushy Father Christmas beard. He's the recently bereaved proprietor of a small funeral home. And his wife's just died, and he's looking for somebody to help run. And she says, "Oh yes, I worked at such and such. I've worked at a number of funeral homes. I worked at such and such a place until it very sadly closed down recently," which is a fact that comes back in
yes.
the movie.
Oh yes, I heard about that.
Yes. Yeah. So she's got all that. Meanwhile, like in a very different setting, in a more urban setting, we have a policewoman, Emma, played by Sacharissa Claxton, who is still trying to. She's basically coping with a pretty terrible loss, the loss of her child, and she's not coping well. She's coming into work looking like she's been dragged through a hedge backwards. She's drinking heavily, and she's not handling the bereavement well in any stretch of the imagination. And her story and Sybil's story are connected. The film is.
But it takes a little while for them to for their paths to cross.
Yeah, and this is beautifully paced. The way that it keeps you in Sybil's story, you're totally mesmerised by that while you're there. Then we go over to Emma, and that's equally fascinating. And we're kind of like, there's got to be a connection somewhere, but and then you start to get an idea of exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that reminded me particularly of a film like Amelie is that from the very beginning, you get the feeling that Sybil not only has a lot of difficulty keeping her fantasy and reality straight, but also that, that there is no real difference between fantasy and reality for her. That whatever impulse she has, whatever thought comes into her brain, she'll play it out. And it's fine when that's inside of her head. It's not so fine when that starts to impinge on the people around her.
It increasingly does. And I mean, I was going to say she seems quite sweet and likable at the start, but even that's that's very fleeting. You're aware quite early on there's something badly wrong here, and also that this is somebody who, it's not so much a case of if she's going to do something terrible, but when, or if indeed she hasn't already. If but when she'll do something terrible again. And it's
like what is the terrible thing that she has done? What is the terrible thing she's going to do? Another thing that really resonated for me was it reminded me, well, there are two things. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. The two things are, it reminded me very much of a short story by Barbara Gowdy called We So Seldom Look on Love, which was based on an actual case where a woman working at a funeral home became very interested in male corpses. And she gave this interview where, it's like they under a pseudonym, I think. But she was sort of like, and I just fell in love with this series of guys. and you're like, by which you mean you had sex with a series of corpses? And she's like, yes, yeah, absolutely, that's right. So Lynn Stopkowicz
the romance kept falling apart on her.
Yeah, exactly, literally. Yes, there was a lot of talk about a trocar. Let's put it that way.
That's one of those things you plunge into a vein, is it?
No, actually, you in this particular case, you'd be putting it in the urethra.
Yeah, no, I figured it wasn't being used for its.
For a very particular reason.
Yeah, I did see Necromantic once, unfortunately.
Yes, exactly. So, Lynn Stopkowicz, a Canadian director, took Barbara Gowdy's short story and made it into her debut film with Molly Parker called Kissed, which I actually reviewed, as I recall. And I interviewed Lynn. And yeah, it's sort of like she wraps it in sort of what I would call typical Canadian magic realism, but it is very much like, well, I have this thing. I can't really, can't really be with a guy who's not dead, and, and eventually, ends up with this dude who really wants to get involved with her, and he eventually hangs himself because he's like, she's never gonna love me any other way.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I mean, it is one of the, interesting. I mean, I joked about, the romance falling apart and with
Yes.
With that kind of relationship, but in many ways, she's almost actually prefers the company of the dead because she can preserve them to at least to a certain extent, and her delusional processes can do the rest. But also, they're not gonna leave, and they're not going to want things that you don't necessarily want them to want, or go places you don't want to go. They won't leave you. And
that's right.
Because one thing that's very clear, we do know about Sybil from very early on, is that she lost her family, her father, her mother, her sibling. There was a car accident, and she was trapped in the car for quite a long time with the bodies before.
Yes.
So there is everybody goes, but you can keep these. And it strikes me very much that one of the things that this film is very much about is grief.
It's about how loneliness will fuck you up. It's about how love can become this curdled thing, and it also reminded me of the case of Dennis Nelson.
Killing for company, yeah.
The whole idea of it's like, but if I don't kill this guy, he'll leave. And I don't want that. I just want him to stay for a little while longer. It's so selfish, and it's so I mean, to make a person into an object. But it is the literal, the object of my affection.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of that quote from Pratchett, and one of the things people often praise Terry Pratchett for is the fact that he was able to deal with often quite complex philosophical ideas and just render them into very straightforward terms, and often in quite a humorous context. But it's one of the things that turns up into his book, where one of his characters essentially defines sin, or the idea of a sin is when you start treating people as things.
Yes.
And
things as people is kind of sad. People as things is evil.
Yeah. I mean, all of this works with the performance. I mean, the three principal characters, certainly the two main characters whose actions drive the story. There's Sybil and there's Emma, and both of them are dealing not very well with this terrible grief, this almost unimaginable level of loss, the loss of an entire family, the loss of a child.
Yes.
I think the breakup of and
the breakup of her marriage, I think, in the wake of that.
Yeah, we're not quite sure if see that before or after, in fact, I think. But certainly, both of them are coping with that very badly and finding very fucked up ways of doing it. And James Fleet's character, while he is in a sort of kind of in an echo of that, he too is trying to deal with the grief of the loss of his wife, and not in a particularly healthy way.
Yeah, and one that Sybil, twigs to real fast.
Yeah.
And, the transition of the relationship between she and Fleet's character, I think is really interesting and kind of tragic. Because in a lot of ways, it's like he's making his way out of it. He's like on the verge of making his way out of it, and then and then she manages, by recognizing the ways in which he's dealing with his grief, and sort of stating them, I think she manages to pull him back down again, which is, it's just very sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really lovely performance from Fleet. Like I said, he usually plays these quite sort of posh twit kind of characters.
Yes.
And so this is a long way away from his usual type. And he's essentially this character who is essentially quite gentle.
And a person who's offering her real affection and real friendship.
Yeah.
Like an actual relationship in real life.
An actual family.
An actual family, yeah. And she's just sort of like, why would I want that?
She wants what the kind of fucks. Because she goes to a local museum and very briefly exchanges a few words with the guide there, who she immediately decides is in love with her. Or she's in love with him, or both. And things go about as things go from one thing, especially as it turns out he already has a girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Who she dislikes even more when he shows up to one of the poetry readings, and she goes up to him and says, "Well, I'll have a sherry, Mark." And the girlfriend's like, "We'll go for it. Buy your friend a sherry. Better than getting otherwise you might get sucked into this fucking awful poetry reading." Oh, at that point, bitch is gonna die. Is kind of, I think, Sybil's attitude. I mean, Sybil is a very complex character. All these different kind of layers to her, and not a character who's, despite the dreadful thing that's happened to her in the past, she's not a character who's particularly sympathetic. And it's a real tribute to Calder's performance that you're actually held completely in her spell. You're completely fascinated by Sybil. You're pulled completely into her world when she's on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, at one point I found myself writing down, "This is weirdly charming."
Yes.
And it's true. It is weirdly charming. She has a weird kind of charm to her. And the moments where you see her mask crack, the moments where you see her realize, oh, I have done something wrong. I have, it's like, stupid.
Yes.
And you feel bad for her, but you also feel bad for the people around her, because that's when things are going to start to, I
mean, what becomes clear is, yes, she's suffering. She's dealing with grief. She's dealing with this terrible pain but this pain that she hasn't found a way to cope with properly. But of course, the flip side of that is that pain creates rage.
Yes.
Hurt people, as the saying goes. They lash out. And I think at one point she's walking along and some kids are laughing at her, and she just turns around and absolutely lets loose on them. In a way that's really quite scary. And you kind of realize, Jesus Christ, if you weren't already clear on this, it's like if you piss her off, run. So it's a beauty. I mean, what really gets you about this is like a lot of the best horror films. It's one of these ones that absolutely hangs on its performances. There were some horror films where you can get away with with performances that are a bit hammy or wooden or whatever. A film like Broken Bird, no, not
at all. I mean,
and it is.
As you know, I'm a fan of found footage in general. And found footage is one of those genres where it doesn't matter if people are not particularly good actors sometimes. But no, this is very much a film. This is very much a movie. This is, so to some degree, the artifice of the film itself calls for real depth and beauty. And genuineness from the acting that it showcases.
It's definitely a horror movie, but it is not a film of jump scares
No.
or even of it's not even kind of the kind of unease you get from the pleasing terror of an M.R. James film. It is something of the Gothic in that you increasingly become aware that you're being enfolded in this kind of atmosphere of madness, of darkness, of we may start out in the real world, but everything is increasingly seen through the lens of Sybil Chamberlain's mind's eye, and as that kind of increasingly swallows us up, then you're in this you're in this kind of dark world that's not quite the one it's kind of a difficult thing, especially because you've got this other story of Emma, the police officer, who is, while she's not exactly in a great state mentally, is still more or less inhabiting the real world as we understand it, as opposed to the one that Sybil Chamberlain lives in. So there is always this thing of what happens when these worlds collide, when they come together.
Absolutely. And I think that's beautifully brought to bear when you as you move towards the climax, and literally Emma is moving into Sybil's world, moving out of her world of dirty dishes and a house that looks lived in, and a house that still has the detritus of her own tragedy, to this place that is so much more fucked up.
So much more fucked up,
but in an epic way, an epic, insane way.
I mean, the difficult part of movies like this, with ones which are basically charting this slow kind of, this slow progress of mental decay, collapse, whatever you want to call it, and especially when that is essentially going to be on a collision course, this delusional world on a collision course with the real world, in inverted commas. It's always going to that final act, that's the landing, as it were, is always the trickiest bit. It's a bit where a lot of otherwise great films can fall down. But that does not happen here. Broken Bird, I think, sticks that landing
not at
all. Beautifully.
And in a lot of ways, it's like, I mean, again, those two worlds are brought together through the medium of the funeral home. And part of the funeral home is the horror, the immediate horror of death. Fixing people's fucked up bodies.
And then creating kind of artifice, creating a kind of of illusion of what this person, something that's supposed to look like this person was in life, doesn't quite, but doesn't kind of look like what they really look like when they were dead.
No, exactly. But by the end, it's sort of like, whoa, this whole time you've been living in Crimson Peak, you'd be living in a haunted garbage heap. It's like,
I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, I don't think either of us, when we watch it, I don't think either of us are going looking for things to find fault with. We're not looking, we're not trying to pick things to, but I think even if we were, I don't think anyone would be very hard put to find anything to find fault with anything that Mitchell's done here.
The choices that she's made in terms of what to show and what not to show. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. It's some of the hardest stuff in terms of filmic narrative from my point of view. It's like, I'm just going to skip over this. And about 2 scenes later, you're going to go, oh my God. That happened. And you didn't have to show me,
There is, again, one of the things I love about it as well is it tells you the story. It fills in the backstory in a way where you're never feeling like it's an info dump, and if anything, you're kind of getting, especially with because exactly what's happened with Emma, to use a Michael Moorcock phrase, the exact nature of the catastrophe, is something that you become aware of by stages. And at first, I thought, oh God, is did this happen? And then it's like, oh no, this happened. And then it's like, oh my God, did this?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't really go take you through my
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
spoiling it, and I don't want to spoil
No,
this film.
absolutely.
People
But
haven't seen it. I really
you
want
know,
to go in with,
talk about Chekhov's frame. It's
yeah.
just like,
There were just kind
okay.
of levels and levels of this,
Yeah.
and it really is one of those. I mean, I don't know how long Broken Bird was in the making. I think it took. I think there was something like, I did see Dominic Brunt say something. As Broken Bird was, he was basically saying how proud he was of Joanne for. For work for everything she'd done on this, because she said, I think she said it was in Serbia about 6 months,
Mm.
making this film away from home. And I don't know how long. I think there may have been a short film
Mm.
before this, possibly
That
called
makes sense. Like almost like a pitch project, almost like a, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how long this whole project has been in development, has been prepared in preparation, and all the rest of it. But what I can't, but it's if I think any director at all would be whether this was their first feature or their 20th,
Mm.
would be incredibly proud of this.
Yeah.
It's made with an assurance, with a visual sense, with an attention to detail of both how it looks and of the performances, and the script, and everything, that is absolutely enviable. It's a hell of a good film.
It really is.
Weirdly,
And
the night
you know,
before I watched it, Kate and I saw the Lucky McKee film May, which has a lot of. There are certain parallels in some ways.
mm,
They both revolve around this desperately lonely character who lives in this sort of this delusional half world of her own, and ends up doing very, very terrible things.
things, yes.
But
And also that female thing of, you know, of feeling that if you can't elicit love in somebody else, if you can't find a key for your own hole, so to speak, if you can't, you know, there's like some empty space in you that the
mm,
world should fill, but maybe you're not good enough to
yeah,
find that thing. You're not good enough to make anybody want to be that
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
And I think in a way, Sybil is like a lot happier than May, and she's because she's older. It's like she's
yeah,
obviously gone through all the stages that May is
yeah,
just going through.
yeah.
She's like,
Everything,
I understand what I need to do. you know?
yeah, everything in me builds towards her doing this terrible
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Whereas, as I say, with Broken Bird, it's not so much a case of will she do something terrible, it's when will she do something terrible again? When will
Yes.
she do another terrible thing? It's all part. It's an interesting, because thinking of one of the things I always remember watching William Lustig's Maniac is this idea that the Joe Spinell character is killing out of this kind of delusional, psychotic
Hmm.
drive, but it doesn't even create to try and create a world in which he is loved. Sticking the scalps of the women he murders onto Taylor's dummies, but
Yes.
even on its own terms, it's failing because everything's decaying. He's frantically
Yes.
spraying bug spray and air
Yes.
freshener
Yeah.
everywhere, and so even on its own terms, even if it's not succeeding, it's destroying him, and yet Sybil is she's kind of reaching she's kind of falling towards her own apotheosis, almost
Yeah.
the logical end point of what
Yeah.
of
To
what
to
the
not
things.
just be a necrophiliac, but to be a necromancer, to
Yeah,
be someone who where these dolls are not dolls anymore, they're people. And it's like people become dolls and the dolls become people. But all the people are her.
She's, again, it's hard to go in. I'd love to go into more detail about this, but again, it's very hard to without
exactly. I mean,
spoiling what it is. So, again, can't stress enough how astonishing Rebecca Calder's performance as Sybil Chamberlain is. Just bringing this, as I say, I keep coming back to Amelie. I keep coming back to Audrey Tautou, and that there is that sort of slightly beguiling quality about her, even as she reveals herself to be an increasingly terrific,
and even exactly, a terrifying person. But even there, it's like that philosophically, they're not so far away from each other, because Amelie's entire thing is, I can make it better. I can make you better. I can make the world better, right?
Yeah.
And that's what Sybil's trying to do too.
Yeah.
But better for her.
In a very fucked up way.
Exactly. I mean, this is the selfishness of trauma, when you're stuck in a moment that you can't get out of. And that moment is, I lost something. Why can I never get that thing back again? And the problem with death is that you can't get that thing back again.
No, you can't.
And that's just the truth.
And you get that thing as well where, I have been hurt. I have suffered terribly.
Yes.
Therefore, I have the right to do,
yes.
what I must do in order to redress that thing. It's that, and it's something you see on a macro scale and on a man. I mean, you see it. We were talking about this with Osman Malik. You see this in Gaza. This kind of thing of we got genocided. We suffered this terrible thing. Therefore, we're allowed to do whatever.
Exactly. I mean, there's a phrase that I like a lot that has come up time and again in my own work, which is the idea of wound as superpower. And the good part of that is, I guess, the X-Men side of the scale, but the bad part of that is, no, unfortunately, your wound cannot completely be a superpower. It's like, what comes out of a wound except for, blood and pus and anger and hatred and,
The point is, you want to close the wound and heal it up.
Yeah, you do. And and this is the thing. And I think that to some degree, Sybil feels like if she healed the wound of losing her family, she would be dishonoring her family. She would be dishonoring the love that she still has for her family.
Yeah.
And
it is about not letting, because that's another thing, as well as about grief.
Yeah.
It's also about,
Emma is also wrestling with this.
It's about not being able to let go.
Yes, literally.
You have to let go of the things you're grieving for. You have to eventually, no matter how much you love them, you have to be able to let them go and say goodbye and say, it's over, or I'll see you on the other side. If that's your belief system. But otherwise, it does become something. You get stuck.
Yeah. I know that for me, I remember at one point I broke up with a guy who I had thought that I was going to marry, and it was about a year and a half, I guess, before I stopped feeling like I'd been hollowed out, and at one point I said very angrily, to my mom, I guess, what was the point of that? What was the point of all that? Because all that love was bullshit. All of that love I had for that guy was bullshit, but the problem is it wasn't bullshit. Loving somebody, whether it pays out or not, whether it ends or not, actually makes you better. It wasn't just for that person. It was for you as well. And this, again, is something that you're not going to understand until you let yourself lose, until you let yourself heal. Poor Sybil.
Poor Sybil, poor Emma, poor
Poor everybody.
James Fleet's
Poor
character.
everybody.
But I mean,
Poor all of us.
that's for him as well. It's he too has that
Exactly.
struggling to let go of what he of what he loveth as well.
For all of us. I mean, we're all just animals who know we're going to die, and the fox on the road is happier to some degree.
Yeah, I suppose a dead fox, isn't she, early on, and you like to see it sort of perched on her desk, sort of looking a lot more perky than it was when she found it.
That's true. That's right. Oh, and now I'm going to be late.
I was joking to a friend about taxidermy. I did once have a copy of a book called Home Taxidermy for Pleasure and Profit. I'm not quite sure what I was thinking, but I don't know how much money there is in a taxidermy business, but I will admit that if I ever did start one, nothing would prevent me from calling it Get Stuffed. It would just have to. I would just have to do that. And so putting me bankrupt with it, putting them out of business within about a week, because nobody's going to. Yes, we need our beloved dog, Get Stuffed.
I also read a couple of books on taxidermy when I was younger because I have been obsessed with Psycho since I saw it. But I just don't know how you're not eventually going to start thinking about I could do some things with that guy. Or indeed, like May, it's like if I put that person's hands with that person's head and that person's whatever.
There were so many jokes about a good stuffing here that we do not want to. I know lowering the tone is kind of what we do, but
yes,
I mean, we've managed. I think we've got through this whole thing with this. This must be our lowest incidence of dick and butt jokes. I think
that's true.
Well,
I was going to talk about how she's very rigid.
We are terrible.
And I did mention the trocar.
So you did mention the trocar. You did mention the trocar, and you're lucky because it's like about 6:00 over there in Canada at the moment. It's gone 11 here. I'm going to go to bed shortly. I have to sleep.
I think that's a good idea.
That fucking thing. That fucking trocar is going to haunt my dreams now. I can imagine myself on a slab with no. Somebody. I think there's some whiskey downstairs. I might pour myself a glass before going to bed.
The mechanics, as I recall, were mainly about face writing.
What's it?
Yes, the mechanics of We So Seldom Look on Love were mainly about face writing. Yes. But not too hard, because otherwise blood or other fluids may start to seep out now.
Oh, God. This does rather remind me of something I saw someone on Twitter a few years ago saying, we are in the middle of a dick riding pandemic. And I wasn't sure if dick riding was supposed to be used as an adjective, is it like in the middle of a fucking pandemic, or if she was actually saying we're in the middle of a pandemic of dick riding. And if so, why was I not told of this?
Yeah, I know.
Where's my invite?
That doesn't sound bad. That doesn't sound too bad. Pandemic, dick riding pandemic. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, face riding pandemic. I mean, we apologise to Joanne Mitchell for taking the discussion into this.
But I absolutely don't apologise to Lynn Stopkowicz or Barbara Gowdy, or indeed that chick whose name I do not actually know.
Okay.
Right.
So in summation, Broken Bird is a really terrific movie.
Yes.
It's just fantastic on every level. And you should, we've said, I think, as much, if not more, than we really ought to say about what happens in it. And that anyone watching this or listening to it, you should you should get hold of this. You should go see this where it's on. You should watch it. You can get it on Blu-ray when it comes out, or streaming, or whatever. Get hold of it, possess it, and and watch this film, because you're really gonna want to. And I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Really. It's an absolutely terrific film. I'm really, really glad we got a chance to watch it. I'm very grateful to Keir Waller at Strike Media again for giving us the chance to see it, and for letting us have a screener. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what Joanne Mitchell will do next as a director.
Absolutely. This is just an amazing debut. Just incredible. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So on into a new era of No Darkness But Ours, a new era of Gods and Monsters, where people actually get in touch with us about stuff.
So all as I said in the recent announcement, everything we're doing from here on in is going to be free. You can just watch it. You have a viewers, if you like what you see, if you want to donate and support us, that's great. You can do so via our Ko-Fi and Patreon pages, and there'll be links to that in the content. If you're watching this on YouTube, then please, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, tune in for any notifications, and whatever I'm not quite sure what the equivalent is on Spotify, which shows you how technically minded I am not.
You're more than I am.
Well, yeah, this is the problem. Basically, neither of us are exactly technically minded, and so we just, we're kind of like, oh, what are we doing here? It's kind of like getting Laurel and Hardy to put a podcast together. So we have some more film. We have some more film reviews coming up in the nearest future. We have more interviews. We have loads more stuff.
Yes.
If there's anything you'd really like to see from us, please let us know in the comments. Until then, we will be back very soon to lower the tone again.
Yep.
But in the meantime, I have been Simon Bestwick.
I remain Gemma Files, and this, of course, is still No Darkness But Ours. See ya.